Okay, welcome to the fifth podcast episode of Dr. M's Functional Medicine and Sports Medicine. This one is about energy, and this one's about fatigue. And remember a few things before we really get into this. This is in no way a substitute for seeing your own healthcare provider. I am not providing you with specific medical information to treat yourself. If healthcare providers are listening, of course, they're going to interpret this that way, the way they want to interpret it to help your own patients. But I'm giving you some benefit from my own experience as a functional medicine doctor for 29 years, a sports medicine and internal medicine doctor for 37 years about, in this case, in this podcast, energy and fatigue. Now, how is Dr. M's experienced podcast different than a lot of other podcasts in functional medicine? Because this is like concentrated orange juice, or this is like a concentrate. Mix water with this. I'm putting a lot of information in a short period of time. Most of these are solos. Why? Because I found when I listen to podcasts, if they're interviews, it's a back and forth banter between the two people, but a lot of it is not practical, useful information that you could either use yourself or as a healthcare provider. So this podcast is for the average person and for healthcare providers. I want to provide a lot of practical information in a short period of time. 20 minutes, I think, is reasonable for most podcasts. Sometimes they're going to be shorter, sometimes a little bit longer. I will rarely do an interview, but those are probably going to be coming up. So, welcome. Let's talk about energy and fatigue. Of course, fatigue is the other end of the spectrum where there's not enough energy. And what does it mean to have enough energy? Well, it means that you have, if we're going to talk about you have enough energy to get through your day. You're not saying things that my patients say, like, I'm burnt out, I'm crashing at 3:00, I can't wash the dishes, all I want to do is sit down and watch TV. You're not saying those things. You're able to make choices about those things, but you have enough energy to do everything, meaning your work, your school, the hobbies you want to do, the sports you want to do, the exercise you want to do. And you have enough energy until the time you get into bed, when you want to get into bed and go to sleep. And if you're having trouble going to sleep or even getting into bed, watch our third podcast on insomnia. I think you'll like it. It's got a lot of practical information. Now, energy. There's different ways to talk about this, but let's just say we need enough of the energy molecule, ATP, to have enough energy to do all the things you want to do. Number one. Number two, we need enough electrons in the body. And a lot of people don't even talk about electrons, but electron and electron charge in the body is very important. It's almost like thinking about your body as a battery. Oh, goodness, what are we going to do with that? Oh, shit. I'm turning this off. Oh, great. Do I have to start again? Oh, God.
We're only 4 minutes in.
Yeah, let's start again. Here we go.
Maybe start at
Turning the volume totally down on this one.
at right after you introduce the
Podcast?
podcast.
Okay, you mean already introduced it's going to be on energy? Yeah.
Yeah. So you did the kind of, this is the solos is what podcast is going to be about. That's how it's structured. And then go to energy.
Okay. So now we're going to talk about energy and fatigue. So energy is produced in the body primarily in the form of a molecule called ATP. And ATP is broken down to release energy for many different cellular functions. ATP is primarily your energy currency. So one key concept here is if the body does not make enough ATP, the person is probably going to experience some fatigue. And if the decline in ATP is severe enough, the fatigue could be enough to get in the way of many activities of daily living. Like the person says, I'm dragging myself to the bathroom, I'm dragging myself to the kitchen, I'm like, I can barely even walk around the house. That is very severe fatigue. So, I mean, you might want to grade it if you have this problem, or if you know someone who has it, how severe is it? How much is it interfering with activities of daily living? I don't know about you, but I want to have enough energy so I can get through my work day, get through a non-work day, um, enjoy people, enjoy eating, have enough, time and energy to make food, do all the things you need to do without feeling like I don't have enough energy to do this. Okay. And so what's an example of this? Have you ever remember having a flu or some virus and just feel like I am just wiped out. I have no energy. That's what this feels like. So this does bring up a topic that viral illnesses can cause fatigue. Okay. And how do they do it? They create a lot of inflammation. So another thing that can create fatigue is a lot of inflammatory molecules can do it. Remember, we already said that mitochondrial problems and mitochondrial dysfunction can do it because you don't produce enough ATP. There's many other things that can do this if we're thinking about, the ability to produce ATP. So just know that actually our mitochondria are not generally healthy these days. And, this one's being recorded in the spring of 2026, but right now our mitochondria, many people are not generally healthy. Do I, as a functional medicine doctor, have a great way of evaluating this? Can I measure this directly? Can I measure the charge in people? No. But there's a lot of information showing that the mitochondria are damaged when they look at them under electron microscopes, and they're just not structurally able to produce enough ATP and functionally able to produce enough ATP. So that's a big deal. So think of mitochondrial health. We're going to talk about ways to support the mitochondria. What else can, decrease energy? Hormonal things can decrease energy. So if the adrenal glands are not producing enough cortisol, if the adrenals aren't producing enough epinephrine or noradrenaline, that can feel like fatigue. If someone is very low testosterone, especially in a man, that can feel like fatigue, but it's a little bit different because it's not like a viral illness or something. What else can do this? Well, kidney issues, liver issues, heart issues, none of those things should be overlooked. And anybody with fatigue should have, a comprehensive metabolic profile, urinalysis. Just remember, and I'm gonna have one or more podcasts on the liver, that liver enzymes do not reflect liver function. And there's some suspicion that liver function is grossly decreased in a lot of us. So that's another thing that can decrease energy. Remember, there's all kinds of things with the heart that can decrease energy. And some people in the last 5 years have been having, heart inflammation, and we've been seeing that for years, but much more since 2020. So the best way to get that evaluated is with an EKG, see a cardiologist, and get an echocardiogram. See if that's occurring. And we also don't want coronary artery disease, which is a deprivation of blood flow, causing fatigue in a person. Okay? So what I would say is first, do you have enough energy? Ask yourself that. Or does someone you love not have enough energy? If so, what's the pattern of it? So let's start talking about some of these patterns. One of the patterns is you wake up in the morning, you don't feel well rested. So one of the biggest reasons for fatigue actually is not getting enough deep sleep or not getting enough number of hours of sleep. And I'm going to reference you to our podcast number 3 on insomnia. It's really important. So sleep is really important, getting 7 or more hours. But remember, if someone has sleep apnea and they're not breathing properly at night, they're not even getting enough oxygen to be able to make enough ATP. So sleep apnea can be a cause of fatigue as well as just not getting enough sleep. Now, we get all kinds of other things that are insulting our bodies, like heavy metals are insulting our bodies. There's many toxins that are insulting our bodies. So there's so many things that are actually toxic that can affect the mitochondria. Some of these things are actually affecting hormones. So, like I said, there's certain screening things that can be done to sort of say, okay, let's get a picture of what might be causing fatigue, because I'm going to tell you it's not usually just one thing. If you go to a doctor and you have fatigue and they say it's just one thing, it may be that they're not looking for all the possible things that can cause this. Some of the things, there's what I call podcast terminology, and I like podcaster. I listen to a lot of them. So you often hear the podcaster, all the things. What that really means is all the cool things, the stacks, the this and that you're going to use to help yourself. Well, this is all the things that might be causing fatigue, and it's often more than one thing. Could be hormonal, could be heavy metals. Oftentimes there's a virus involved, and what's really interesting is viruses multiply using our own cells. They can damage the mitochondria, they create a lot of inflammation. But ever since COVID, we've been seeing a lot of reactivation of viruses. So if you or someone you love has fatigue, some of the viruses that are really important to measure are Epstein-Barr virus, especially the early antigens, the early D antigens, really important. CMV virus, herpes viruses, and then there's all kinds of specific viruses like West Nile virus, encephalitis virus. There's a lot of viruses that are actually reactivating, and one of my colleagues, Dietrich Klinghardt, is very into retroviruses. This is another thing that can cause fatigue. So we have to have a way of sort of testing for these things, treating these things. Another thing that can cause significant fatigue is Lyme and co-infections like Bartonella and all these things, Babesia. So we have to actually have an accurate way of testing for that. And remember, the average lab test for Lyme and co-infections doesn't pick up a lot of the chronic Lyme and co-infections. So you want to make sure any healthcare provider you're seeing knows the most accurate tests to pick those up. Because it just could be that is one of the big things that's causing the fatigue in you or somebody else. So what I'm trying to create a picture of is there's this massive number of things that could affect our mitochondria, that could affect our hormones, that's going to have an end output of just not having enough energy to carry out our day. Now, I do want to differentiate body fatigue from brain fatigue. What's the difference? If you've got brain fatigue, what you're going to feel like is, I use my brain for this amount of time and then I can't use it anymore. I come up against a wall. That is brain fatigue. Different than body fatigue. I'll probably have a whole podcast episode on brain fatigue. But don't forget my 2 episodes on podcast 1 and 2 on brain fog, because that goes into a lot of those causes. Okay, now, so this brings up another interesting issue. What else can cause fatigue? Electromagnetic fields. There are some people that when they're in strong radio frequency fields from Wi-Fi, cell phones, towers, the 5G towers, they feel more fatigued than when they're not in those strong fields. So that's another reason. Okay, so I want to bring up something practical that you could do, that probably anybody could do, to increase the electrical charge of your body. Now, is it easy to get an electrical charge of your body measured? No, it's not. But there have been some experiments done in the last couple of years, and these researchers are basically saying that the average electron charge of the human body is 50% or less than what it should be. That's almost like the average person walking around has a battery that's half empty most of the time. And that's not a good thing. So if you say, you know what, I want to do something that's safe, that's generally effective, that's not very expensive to increase energy. What is it? Grounding. Let's talk about it. Grounding has been talked about a lot, but I think there's a lot of misconceptions here. Why? In order to ground, you have to have skin in the game. You have to have some skin touching the grounding material. And the grounding source has to be really clean. So If you're on a first floor, you could have a grounded sheet or something like that, or grounded foot pad, and then it could go out the window, out the door, and be put in the ground in a stake. Then you have to measure it to make sure there's actually grounding. If you put it into your ground in your house, you got to make sure that you don't have a lot of dirty electricity. So if you're going to do that every night or day, have someone come to your house and measure your house for grounding to see if the grounded port is clean or if you need something to clean it up, because there are devices, and we'll leave some things after the podcast on devices that you might be able to use to clean up dirty electricity. Okay. But let's say you figure this out. You're going to use wires if you live on if your bedroom's on the first floor, or you're going to plug into the ground. What's the best thing? Grounded fitted sheets and grounded top sheets and grounded pillowcases. And then how do you use them? You make sure that when you go to bed, you have a lot of skin showing. Basically, you don't have to be totally naked, but a lot of skin showing. The skin has to touch the grounded sheets and grounded pillowcase. Why a grounded pillowcase? Because you want electrons coming in through the skin of your head. That's a very good idea, because then you'll increase the charge in your face, your muscles, and your brain. What are you looking for when you're looking for a product that will do this? Something that actually feels good against the body, and something that has approximately 10% silver sewn integrated into the product. And so after this podcast, we're going to have links to a company that I like, that I think meets all the requirements. And in fact, I've been using this product for 2 years, so I can vouch for it. My energy increased by at least 20% when I started doing this, because I used to have a fatigue issue where I would work as a doctor during the day and come home, I couldn't even exercise. That's the type of fatigue. I just didn't even have enough energy to work out on the elliptical, lift weights, or whatever. Now I do. Okay, so remember, grounded fitted sheets, grounded top sheet, grounded pillowcase. That's 3 areas of grounding. And then when you're at your computer, if you're able to, a grounded pad, and then you're going to wear bare feet. It's really not practical to sit outside long enough to ground. So what's the statistics, the data on that? There's been studies of dark field microscopy. They looked at people's blood and looked at the red cells. What the red cells look like? Sometimes they were damaged, clumped together, and then they had someone then go outside, put their feet on the ground. After 10 minutes, they come in. Now, maybe this was 10 years ago, and their red cells would look good. Guess how long it takes now? Because there's so much damage to our red cells, and most of the time our red cells are in this thing called rouleau formation. They're all packed together. They're not able to deliver oxygen that well. It takes 3 hours of grounding to actually normalize the red blood cells so they can move around easily through the capillaries and deliver oxygen. Well, most of us are not going to sit on a long chair with just our feet on the ground for that long. Plus, it would be better to have more skin exposed to get grounding for more surface area. That's why this concept of grounding with sheets in bed at night, every night, whenever you can do it. Okay? Now, I want you to tune in to our podcast 4, which is about electromagnetic fields, because I want you to learn how electromagnetic fields can disrupt energy and the practical things that you can do regarding decreasing radio frequency fields and electromagnetic fields so that those things are not adversely affecting your energy. Okay? Now, I am assuming from this that the average person is going to get checked with laboratories by the average doc for the very normal things that could cause more severe fatigue, like anemia, like kidney failure, like liver problems, like heart problems, and problems with the lungs. Those are the most common things that are going to do it. I already talked about sleep apnea because we don't want that happening without treating it. Okay? Now, let's just say we're wondering, okay, how do you support a mitochondria to produce more energy? And let's bring up something, because I like to get sophisticated. I would like to say This is a sophisticated functional medicine broadcast. There's so many of them, but I've been doing this for 29 plus years. A lot of the functional medicine docs haven't been doing it for this long. I've seen so many thousands of patients. One of the concepts is sometimes we have something called the cell danger response. What does that mean? The body is under attack from something, usually an infection, could be a virus, could be something else. It shuts down the mitochondria somewhat, so they're just not even producing enough ATP. Okay? If that is occurring and you try to jumpstart mitochondria, then it might just backfire. And that fatigue might be necessary until, the body actually is able to take on what it's supposed to take on that it's under threat from. So let's just assume for the time being that your body or whoever's body is not in a cell danger response, because the cell danger response is a little bit more out of the scope of how to deal with that, because it's a very difficult problem. But let's say it's not in that. How do you support mitochondria? First foundation level is mostly methylated B vitamins, and you can find that in a lot of vitamins these days. In the links below, we're going to list a couple of multivitamins that I actually like that have methylated B vitamins. So we're going to list that for you. Okay, so what else? We need minerals to make help our mitochondria make energy. Magnesium, zinc, and one of the most misunderstood minerals is copper. I might have a whole podcast on copper. I have become somewhat of a copper interested functional medicine doc because copper got sort of a bad rep years ago. Everybody was thinking they were going to get copper toxic. Copper got taken away from the multiple vitamins. And did you know that copper is needed for most cellular functions? That if you are very low in copper but don't have much, you're not going to really have optimal energy production. Did you know that most of us at one point, well, if you're old enough, lived in a home that had copper pipes? Now, most of our homes have plastic pipes. So a lot of us used to get copper just from the pipes. Most of us did not actually get copper toxic. But the reason why copper was taken out of so many products, supplements, was because of supposed copper toxicity, which is very, very unusual. So I'm going to tell you this right now. I think everybody should probably have about 1.5 to 2 milligrams of copper per day. And copper and zinc need to be in a ratio of about 2 milligrams or 2 parts copper, 25 parts zinc, something like that. And here's another clinical pearl, and I'm going to give a lot of them. If you're doing chelation, like with EDTA to get lead out, lead and mercury out, these chelating agents can bind to magnesium, to copper, to zinc, and literally pull out the good minerals when they're also pulling out bad metals. So if you're doing a chelation program, you have to have what's called mineral days. And on those mineral days, you have to replace copper, zinc, magnesium, and then, all your minerals. And I don't really believe or agree that we all need, 99 trace minerals. Those are the big ones: magnesium, zinc, selenium, copper. Those have to be replaced on your mineral days if you're doing heavy metal treatments. Okay. So a good multiple vitamin, we'll put a link to one that I really like at the end of this podcast. What's a second level thing? I already talked about the minerals, so either they're in the multiple or you take like a separate zinc and copper. You could do that. You could take some separate magnesium if you're going to do that. Make sure it's not oxide. That will cause number twos. What we really want is enough minerals to supply the mitochondria. So how much you need? 400 to 600 milligrams of magnesium a day? Probably. Okay. What else do you need? You need a good operating thyroid gland. Very important for energy. Good operating adrenal glands. But something to just supply some function for the mitochondria is coenzyme Q10. What's the problem with this product? Mainly it's underdosed. So I'd say the problem is it's underdosed. People are taking 50 milligrams of it, 100 milligrams. That's not very much. if you really want to do something about fatigue, I'd say you should take 200 milligrams twice a day. Get enough of it. And anybody on a statin drug absolutely needs 100 to 200 milligrams of it to counteract the fact that it lowers CoQ10. What else could you do above the CoQ10? Well, that's when we get into things like supporting NAD, which is beyond the scope of this particular podcast, but NAD and supporting NAD is very linked to supporting ATP. So if you're going to support NAD, you got to do it the right way, because there's multiple pathways in terms of supporting NAD, the salvage pathway, the P38 inflammation pathway, and the precursor pathway. They all got to be dealt with. Okay, so you could take an NAD supporting nutrient. And I'll put a link to one that I really like called Time Plus that supports all the pathways. Very, very, very good product to support NAD. What else could support energy? Well, there's something called PQQ that could support energy. There's a number of these, what I would call designer nutrients. Another possibly designer nutrient is methylene blue. It's a blue dye that actually significantly supports mitochondrial function. How much methylene blue might you need? Minimum probably 15 milligrams, maximum probably 50. Most people need about 25 to 30. How do you know if you're taking methylene blue that you're actually taking it and it's a good product? Well, your urine will turn green or blue. Number one, if it doesn't, you're not taking methylene blue, even if it says it's methylene blue. And I've had that experience. I'm taking something, I think it's methylene blue. Now, when your urine turns green or blue, you're actually taking methylene blue. Do I recommend it in the drops? No. Why? Because your tongue will look like you're a Smurf. Do you want to look like a Smurf? No. So take it in a capsule. Take it in a capsule or take it in a little pill. And we'll also have a link to my favorite methylene blue company that I guarantee will turn your urine green or blue. But it also greatly increases energy. Now, what's really interesting is if you also have Bartonella, which is one of these Lyme co-infections, which can decrease energy, methylene blue is kind of a critical supplement type of thing to take to also treat Bartonella and increase your energy. So I've talked about a lot of things here. In a nutshell, we want enough energy to get through the day. This is different than just brain fatigue. This is body fatigue. We want to check all the things, hormonal issues, adrenal issues, thyroid issues, sex hormone issues. We want to check for viral reactivation, which we're going to have a whole podcast about. We want to check for Lyme and co-infections. We want to check for heavy metals. I mean, there's so many things, even just regular chemicals. Fire retardants. We could do like a total tox panel. There's a lab that I like that does that called Vibrant Labs. We can talk about that more in another podcast. But we want to evaluate all these things that can cause fatigue and then have an approach to it. First, decide is someone in a cell danger response. If they aren't, start augmenting the function the way I just told you how to do it. Come to a level that hey, if I do this, I'm fine. Get more than 7 hours of sleep, and then just realize there's so many things insulting our energy that you really have to be on top of this, on top of the viruses, on top of the Lyme and the co-infections. One thing I forgot to bring up is mold and mold biological toxins can cause significant fatigue and mitochondrial issues. Another factor to be checked. So many things to be checked to look for causes of fatigue. But I'm going to tell you that in most people, it's not one thing. It's not just kidney issues. Or let's say you get a test and it says, oh, you got stage 2 kidney dysfunction. Well, then you got to ask the question, what's actually causing it? I had a very interesting case where I had a guy that was fatigued. It turned out he had a GFR that was low, and it looked like he was in stage 3 kidney failure. Turns out when we did the heavy metals test, high arsenic levels. It turned out he had actually well water. He got it tested, high arsenic in it. So that then is an example of, okay, it's not just kidneys that are producing the fatigue, because there are actually other things producing as fatigue. But why were the kidneys, having a problem? And what do we do about it? So there's so many things that could cause fatigue. Want to look for all the different causes, support the mitochondria, get enough energy, and keep up with it, because I'm telling you, your energy is so important. It's like your vital force. You want to have more than enough energy. In future episodes, we're going to look at different parts of this, the hormonal aspects of this, viral reactivation. We're going to look at Lyme and the co-infection. We're going to look at a lot of aspects of this. But I hope you enjoyed this podcast on fatigue. Don't forget to check out, after our podcast, the links that we have to our affiliates that have actual testing and products that I think you're going to really like in terms of trying to figure out why and in terms of augmenting your own energy. And thank you for listening.